On the sweltering afternoon of May 22, 2020, a routine domestic flight in Pakistan turned into a national tragedy. Pakistan International Airlines Flight PK8303, an Airbus A320-214, was on its final approach to Jinnah International Airport in Karachi when disaster struck. In its last moments, the pilot's chilling words echoed over the radio. "Mayday! Mayday! Pakistan 8303. Within seconds, the aircraft crashed into a densely populated residential area, turning homes into rubble and sparking a fireball that sent black smoke soaring into the sky. What was supposed to be a short and uneventful journey from Lahore to Karachi ended in one of the country's deadliest aviation disasters. Flight PK8303 had taken off from Lahore at 1:05 p.m., just 5 minutes behind schedule. It was a domestic route of approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes, connecting two of Pakistan's major cities. The aircraft, an Airbus A320 with registration a PIA, was equipped with two reliable CFM56-5B4P engines and had been in service for 16 years. It was declared airworthy, and its maintenance history showed it had been kept in good operational condition. There were 99 people on board, 91 passengers and 8 crew members. With the COVID-19 pandemic causing widespread flights were limited, but the approaching Eid holidays meant demand was high, and this particular flight was fully booked. Commanding the flight was Captain Sajjad Gol, a highly experienced pilot with over 18,000 flight hours and 24 years of service with PIA. His first officer, Usman Uzum, was 33 years old and had been flying with PIA for more than a decade. Both men were seasoned professionals. However, the investigation would later reveal that experience alone is not always enough. When key protocols are ignored and fatigue dulls decision-making ability, the flight climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. Weather conditions were favorable both at departure and arrival airports, with clear skies and good visibility. As the aircraft settled into cruise, the cockpit voice recorder captured casual conversation between the pilots. It also noted that both were fasting due to when the cabin crew offered snacks, they declined. This detail, seemingly minor at the time, would later be scrutinized for its potential impact on their judgment, alertness, and ability to respond under pressure. The problems began as the aircraft approached Karachi. Normally, inbound flights from Lahore follow a standard descent route via Nawabshah before aligning for landing. On this day, the original assigned route was Nawabshah, which allowed a longer descent path and smoother altitude management. However, due to reduced air traffic during the pandemic, the captain requested a shortcut directly to Makli, a closer waywind to the airport. Karachi ATC granted the request, but a critical error occurred when the pilots failed to update the flight management system to reflect the new shorter route. The FMS, still operating on the assumption of a longer approach, began calculating descent parameters accordingly. By the time PK8303 reached Makli, it was still flying at an altitude of 10,000 feet to 3,000 feet higher than what was required for a stable approach. Air traffic controllers noticed the altitude discrepancy and advised the pilot to consider orbiting the waywind to reduce altitude. But Captain Sajjad, showing strong confidence in his ability to manage the descent, refused the suggestion and pressed ahead. He believed he could bring the aircraft down in time for a safe landing. What followed was a steep and rapid descent, with the aircraft losing altitude at over 2,400 feet per minute, far above the typical safe descent rate. The nose was down, speed was increasing rapidly, and warning alerts began sounding in the cockpit. Meanwhile, the pilots made a second error. They accidentally changed the radio frequency, losing communication with air traffic control. Karachi ATC repeatedly tried to reach the aircraft without success, eventually resorting to emergency frequency to re-establish contact. Controllers again noted that the aircraft was too high and descending too fast, and once again advised the captain to orbit and lose speed and altitude. The captain, determined and possibly fatigued, insisted they were fully established for landing and refused to circle. As the aircraft approached the runway, a critical and inexplicable oversight occurred. The landing gear was never extended. In the chaos of warnings and confusion, both pilots missed this basic and essential step. The cockpit voice recorder captured multiple alarm warnings, including the unmistakable gear warning, but they were either ignored or not processed. When the plane touched down on the runway, it did so with its belly, no wheels down. The aircraft scraped the runway multiple times, 4 separate touches within 16 seconds, and both engines hit the ground, sustaining severe damage. Sparks flew. Oil began leaking. Inside the cabin, passengers were violently shaken by the impact. Realizing they could not stop the plane, the captain ordered a go-around, a standard aviation maneuver when landing cannot be completed. The first officer, startled, shouted, "Take off, sir! Take off!" In a flurry of reaction, the captain obeyed and pulled the plane back into the air, but it was already too late. The damage was done. The left engine failed almost immediately due to the impact. The plane struggled to climb, relying on a single failing engine. Still, the crew attempted to circle back and land again. ATC, now fully aware of the emergency, cleared all runways for PK8303 and urged the pilots to land anywhere they could. But then the second engine began vibrating. Within moments, it too failed. The plane was now gliding, powerless, descending rapidly with no engine thrust. At this point, the captain lowered the landing gear, but this added drag, slowing the aircraft further. Every foot of altitude lost brought them closer to the ground, but further from the runway. They were lined up for a landing, but too far out and too low to make it. At 600 feet, the captain finally radioed the distress call. "Mayday, Mayday Pakistan, 8303. Seconds later, at exactly 2:45 p.m., the aircraft crashed into the narrow, densely populated neighborhood of Model Colony. It struck just 1,340 meters short of the runway. The crash caused a massive explosion, shaking the area and sending a thick column of black smoke into the sky. Homes were destroyed, families were devastated, and chaos erupted as residents rushed to the scene. Emergency services arrived quickly, but narrow lanes made it difficult for rescue vehicles to operate. Miraculously, 2 passengers survived the crash: Zafar Mas, a senior bank executive, and Mohammed Zu, a young man traveling home for Eid. Their survival was a rare glimmer of hope in an otherwise horrific scene. 97 of the 99 people on board were killed. 1 person on the ground lost their life as well. The crash rocked the nation. Within hours, a full investigation was launched by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board of Pakistan, in coordination with Airbus and international aviation experts. The investigation findings were sobering. The primary cause of the crash was identified as human error. Captain Sajjad Gul was found to have violated multiple protocols. He ignored repeated instructions from ATC, failed to recognize critical warnings, and persisted in attempting a landing under unsafe conditions. The first officer, although concerned, failed to assert himself strongly enough. Their cockpit resource management, the team communication and decision-making had broken down completely. Further, both pilots were fasting, which investigators believe may have contributed to fatigue, reduced alertness, and impaired judgment. Fasting itself was not blamed, but it was cited as a factor, and PIA later implemented restrictions on pilots flying while fasting. One of the most alarming findings came in the aftermath of the crash. Investigators uncovered that over 40% of pilots in Pakistan held licenses that were either fake or obtained through fraudulent means. This revelation triggered international outrage. PIA was banned from flying to the European Union and the United States. Dozens of pilots were grounded, and major reforms were demanded across Pakistan's civil aviation infrastructure. In the final report, partial blame was also placed on air traffic controllers for failing to inform the pilots that the landing gear had not been extended. Had that been caught and communicated earlier, the outcome might have been different. Experts agreed that the safest course of action would have been to abort the first landing and hold in the air, while the situation was assessed. Even after the first belly landing, it might have been better to stop on the runway and deal with engine fire risks with airport emergency services nearby. Instead, the decision to take off again sealed the fate of everyone on board. The PK8303 crash remains one of the most devastating tragedies in Pakistan's aviation history. It was not caused by mechanical failure or sabotage, but by a tragic mix of overconfidence, fatigue, and failure to follow established procedures. It exposed deep-rooted issues in the country's aviation regulatory system and served as a wake-up call for comprehensive reform. For the families of those lost, the crash left an unbearable void. For the survivors, the memory of that flight, the sound, the heat, the chaos, will never fade. For Pakistan and its national airline, it was a moment of reckoning. PK8303 was a routine flight that went horribly wrong, but it was also a disaster that could have been prevented at multiple stages. The lives lost that day demand not only remembrance but a commitment to ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again.